Hi there, my name is Nic Watt. I recently volunteered to help the RetroArch team triage and fix some of the potential UX issues that the RetroArch app faces. As a UX designer, I'm going to take the team through a process that I like to use by building a Google slide deck and then maybe laterally Figma deck, which will start to get a more holistic understanding of where the app is at the moment, and work through some of the maybe long-standing issues, particularly some of the bugs that are listed on the bug database, and get a better understanding through that of the personas and users that currently use the app, and then potentially by having that more holistic understanding, apply that knowledge to actually making some suggestions on how to better utilize or improve the interface. So with that said, I'm going to jump over to the slide deck. So as I've already discussed, the goal is to improve the user experience of RetroArch, and by doing, in order to do that, I want to try and create a holistic understanding of its current UX, both positive and negative. And that's important because it's easy just to come along and try and design some user interfaces, right? But we need to understand why it is the way it is, what users use it at the moment, how they use it, and from there try and actually make suggestions that are going to work for the product, for the current users, and for the goals of the product, and not just design a really cool, swish, nice-looking user interface. So this is a living, breathing document. So this second slide will be the contents page eventually. There's only one section in at the moment, personas, which we're about to talk about and is the goal for today. And then over time, this contents will grow, and I'll cover each one probably in separate videos. So personas. I like to think of personas as an easy and ideally non-contentious way of being able to discuss segments of users. Now, it's important to mention that most people, as in real humans and most users, don't necessarily just neatly fit into one persona bracket. Most people might fluctuate between some of them from time to time. Most people maybe tick what it feels like more than one of them, but most of us, most of the time, will fit into one of them as kind of our core persona, and then the other ones will be sub-functions of the way we use an application. It's also useful, and I like to use personas for this purpose, it's useful to use them because it removes some of the politics around conversations and detaches us personally from what it is that we're trying to solve. And so we can actually have a more holistic conversation together about what problems users might be facing and how better to serve them. Because we all have personal taste, and that's great, right? But it doesn't help sometimes when we're trying to collectively solve a problem that's not just about what shirt I should wear today, and more about something that hundreds or maybe hundreds of thousands of people are going to use. So I've grouped these personas into four main types, and I'll go into more detail on on the subsequent slides. So we have the developer, the expert, the gamekeeper, and the novice. They're probably already triggering concepts in your head, and that's a good thing. I've deliberately chosen those words so that as we talk about them as persona groups or as users, that because we know what those words mean, we have a fairly good kickstart idea of the type of people we're talking about, right? But the subsequent slides will kind of detail that a little bit more, and it's something that we can kind of grow over time. Now, good use of personas is to try and find the right number. You don't want too many, and this is a little bit like how hot or cold is my porridge, but you don't want too many because it just subdivides the user base into like too much detail. But you also don't want too few because if you've only got one persona type, then you're probably not really considering your user base holistically. or correctly, and you probably don't have the full understanding of them. So I feel like 4 to 6 is probably not a bad, good starting point for a persona, number of personas. 1 or 2 can often be tricky. Anyway, we'll move on from that. So as part of this, and part of the education process I want to try and do, and to try and help us all get collectively on board, this visualization is important because my feeling, happy to be proved wrong about any of this, and not in an argumentative fashion, but in a, I'm getting up to speed with everything about RetroArch. I do use it as a user. I have used it for quite a while as a user, but I'm not a developer until recently. I've not worked on the development side. So my feeling is that the majority of people who come to RetroArch either love retro games, want to play retro games, or love games and want to play games, right? So the big white circle is games players persona, right? I feel like it's probably the majority, if not all, of the users will fall into the games players bracket. Now, I'm still keeping that persona because it's important, because that's probably the persona that's going to define the reason for most features existing, because we're not making like a photo editing app, we're not making an architectural design piece of software, right? We're making a games playing piece of software. So if it's not servicing the function of playing retro games in particular, or games at the very least, then it's probably not a good feature to be adding, right? It doesn't need to suddenly, build a wall for a piece of architecture. But within that, the other personas sit inside the games player persona. And I feel like the novices are probably either the biggest bracket of users that currently exist, or the biggest potential bracket of users that RetroArch appeals to, because I feel like retro gaming is in a very popular state at the moment, and is only likely to expand. And the biggest demographic it's likely to expand into is probably going to be the novices. Many of the current users will probably fall into the experts bracket. I'm sure there's many that are novices, and maybe that is a majority. And then developers, I feel like, are experts plus, because they've become experts, they've enjoyed the app, they know the ins and outs of it, and then they volunteered their time to actually contribute and improve and develop RetroArch, which is awesome, right? So I'm going to start with a games player. So as I said before, that's likely all users kind of fit into that persona. And while it seems like, well, why would we have that persona? It's important because it helps us differentiate from what we clearly should make as a feature and what we clearly should not make as a feature of RetroArch, right? And a silly example is like adding photo editing, right? Probably not a good feature to add because it's not helping a games player, okay? So on the left-hand side, the intention behind it from all of the personas is to help you get in the head of who that person is or what that user thinks, okay? And we can add more as we need. And on the right-hand side is a list that could probably be exponential, which is kind of like features or functions, and particularly user experience needs that that persona type might have, okay? Now, because it's a games player, majority of the UX features and functions, like literally everything, could be listed on the right-hand side because our entire app is about playing games. So on the left-hand side, you'll see there, I want to play my favorite retro games. I've chosen that as kind of the summary of the games player, right? They either like retro games, or they've recently got into retro games, or they want to get into retro games, and they want to play them. And so RetroArch is a pretty good choice for that, okay? As we're all aware. So subsets of that, I've heard about this particular retro game and I want to play it, or I've got a big collection, which is me. I actually have a big collection of physical retro games, and I have gone down the rabbit hole of trying to get them all backed up so I can play them in a more modern fashion. I want to preserve all of that, particularly all the game saves that I've gone to the lengths of playing these games and saving them. I want to try and find a way to preserve that. There's other people, who are kids or families or big garages or basements. They want to set a standalone box up that they just turn on, they can start playing retro games as soon as the bot boots up. So these are some of the goals and intentions. I'm sure there's more, and people can add them or suggest them. On the right-hand side is a smorgasbord of UI and UX needs and wants that this persona has. So the core one, obviously, is they need a user interface that lets them play retro games. Now, my assumption is that the reason RetroArch exists is that way back in the day, there was a whole bunch of individual emulators, and there obviously still are, and they each had their own user interface, and it was very clunky, and someone had the bright idea of building RetroArch to try and pull all of that together, right? And that's cool. And so, you can see that there, a summary. I want a way to easily add old consoles to be able to play games on them. I want a way to be able to easily add games to be able to play them. I want to be able to save and load data or use my existing save data and so on and so forth, right? This is a good way of thinking about how to build the software. And obviously a lot of that's already been done in RetroArch, right? Because it does so much already. At the bottom is just a rough summary or explanation. As we've already mentioned, the games player is our core persona, which means that pretty much all the users that come to RetroArch probably are this persona. And as I've already said, that means probably all the features that we've designed or will design are aimed at people who play games. And that's good because it can help us really clearly decide whether or not we actually should even do this feature. But the subsequent personas, that's going to be in the important nuance of, is this feature something that only an expert needs or a developer needs and therefore doesn't need to be super user-friendly? Or is it something that novices are going to need and therefore we need to actually pay more attention to how we use it, how we integrate it, how we build it, etc. So the next persona, a good place to start, is the novice. The novice is someone who isn't super clear about how they use software. And so their core goal is not, I want to play about with everything and change all the settings, is I want to install RetroArch and be playing retro games inside of 10 minutes. Now, 10 minutes is just a number I picked, but the reason it's deliberately short is because it's to emote on us the fact that these people don't have a lot of patience, aren't experts, and just want to get playing games fast, right? So the subsequent things, I don't want to spend time faffing around, I just want it to work, I don't enjoy spending time fiddling with settings or computers, I want to set it up quickly once and not have to worry about it. These are all things that a novice is going to express and is likely potentially where a lot of the negative feedback that RetroArch gets periodically is coming from. And so their UI needs and wants, the core one really is a UI that's simple to use. They want to be able to just download it, install it, and be playing games, right? They don't want to spend a lot of time on setting screens, and actually it probably scares them when they do. They don't necessarily want to do a lot of research by going onto Google or reading articles or whatever to help them make decisions or know what settings to change. And they particularly don't want red herrings or traps. They're not the type of user who's going to be able to see A or B. So let's use a core, for example. Let's say there's 5 N64 cores. They're not going to be able to look at those cores and easily decide which one's actually worth them using, right? They're not going to be able to do that. And that they become a red herring, particularly if one of them is clearly so bad that no one, you'd be an idiot to use it, right? They're never going to know that. They're not going to have that knowledge, and they're not going to Google that knowledge to be able to find that out. And so it's important that if we want to better equip the user interface for that, we have to try and find ways to help them avoid those red herrings, while not necessarily killing off the other persona types that we have as well, right? And I think part of the tension that comes into some of the conversations that developers have is, how do we satisfy one group without completely pouring boiling water over another group, right? And that's something that I'm equipped to help, and I've got some ideas on that, and that's exactly what user experience design is good at, is helping, you can satisfy both camps, but it requires work, and it requires ways of designing the interface where one maybe is a bit more of a priority, but it doesn't throw the other one out either. So as I said before, they're likely the biggest group of users on RetroArch, and they probably heard that it lets them play retro games easily, which is why they've installed it, and then they maybe become a little bit unstuck. The next group of users is the expert. They're the type of people who get very excited about software and who really like to explore software and feel very comfortable at software, and it's likely there's a fair number of those at the moment. And so their core goal is that they want to adjust RetroArch exactly to their liking. They want to fiddle with everything. They're very confident in computers. They've used RetroArch or similar software before, and they enjoy the complexity. And so for them, they need a UI that allows them to adjust or customize it to their liking, right? And that's kind of, RetroArch, I would argue, is fairly close to that at the moment. I'm sure there's still friction that this group faces as well. But it is very much something that if you want to play with settings all day, you can definitely do that in RetroArch, right? And so for them, they want features exposed. They want multiple choices. They potentially do want to be able to say, oh, do I want that or that or that? That's probably a completely valid thing for this group of people, right? And so now you've already got these two polar opposites in that the novice doesn't want that and the expert does. How are we going to tackle that? Well, we can do that. We can definitely solve that. But it's going to require us changing some of the ways we do things from how they're done at the moment. And we will get to that as we start to go through this process. The final group are the developer. So developer is likely probably most people are watching this video, and obviously everyone that's actually either worked on or is still currently working on kindly help with give their free time to improve RetroArch, right? They want to improve it. That's their goal and intention. And so they want to help the team make it better. They want to add new features or fix bugs or improve existing features. And one of their core use cases is they want to be able to load up RetroArch, test the thing that they're doing, see if it works or doesn't work, debug it if it needs to be debugged, quit, make some changes, and then do all of that again, right? And so for them, it can be very frustrating if things are really hidden away or difficult to find or require 20 menus to get to, because if you're just testing that feature, you've got to keep burrowing down every single time you press run. And that just takes up time and is frustrating. And so for them, they need a UI that lets them do their work, right? A way to load up RetroArch and test features, and particularly ones they're working on, so that they can run, test, debug, tweak, fix, run again, right? And so this persona, is likely a subset of the expert. They have migrated from experts into people who have volunteered their time to develop it, and as such, they're the backbone of the software. And so we've got to bear in mind, particularly as developers, that we are not the core user base, and that we have to find ways to, like, how do we get the developers to do their job, but not completely change the interface so that the novices and the experts are like, what's going on? I don't understand. So the final slide, and I'm going to stop this in a few minutes, shows the split between the user groups and then the features on the right-hand side. So you can see there that my hypothesis is that developers are a smallest pool, then the experts, and then the novices. And on the right-hand side, that the split of features is actually more aimed at the experts and the developers at the moment, and the novices last. Now, it's fairly understandable because it's a volunteer project. It's not a big company. There's not a lot of UI and UX and other disciplines involved in the making of RetroArch. And so it's totally understandable that it's got to this point. But now is also a good time for it to be changed, because a lot of the bedrock is there, and it can actually be changed relatively, in inverted commas, simply. And I'd also like to add, it's not a bad place to be either. Like, I've worked on plenty of games consoles now, from PlayStation 1 onwards, and ones that have a final customer-facing user interface, when you're a developer, do not look like that, and are not cool, and are not easy to use, and are generally just white screens with lots of text on them. But they get changed, right? And when you open up a PlayStation or a Switch or whatever, you have a great user interface in front of you. So we can definitely get there, and we can definitely maintain the satisfaction of all of these groups. It will require change, so we all have to embrace that. but I've got a lot of ideas on how we can do that. So the rest of this document and future presentations will cover all of that. That's the first video. I'm going to record more, and I'm going to try and link this onto Discord, and you can add comments and everything, and I'll link the slide deck as well. So everyone have a happy new year, and thanks for watching.